A dollar you had in January 2020 is now worth 82 cents. You didn't spend it. You didn't lose it. You didn't get robbed, but 18% of your money just vanished. And nobody sent you a bill. See, there's a tax you pay every single day. It's not on your pay stub. It's not voted on by Congress or Parliament. There's no line item, no receipt, no notification on your phone. But it takes more from the average household than almost any official tax ever does. And the worst part, the very people measuring it have designed a system that makes it look smaller than it actually is. Today we're going to pull this thing apart, how it works, who benefits, and why the number your government reports and these has almost nothing to do with what you actually feel. If you find topics like this fascinating, hit subscribe. We break down the most important stories about how our world actually works. Let's start with something simple. Picture your grocery cart in January 2020. Nothing fancy. Ground beef, eggs, bread, some coffee, the basics. That cart cost you about $50. Now picture walking into the exact same store, grabbing the exact same items today in 2024. That cart now costs you $65. And by 2026, projections put that same cart near $68.50. That's almost $970 more per year than you were spending in 2020, just on the basics. Now here's the thing, if you turn on the news right now, you'll hear anchors say inflation is cooling down.
The inflation that is cooling in January.
In the US, the official rate is 3.3%. In the UK, it's 2.3%. Canada, 2.7%. Politicians are practically taking a victory lap, and technically, they're not lying. Prices are rising slower than they were in 2022, when inflation hit 9.1% in the US and a brutal 11.1% in the UK. But here's what they're not saying. Slower doesn't mean less expensive. It means the bleeding slowed down. The wound is still there. Cumulative inflation in the US since the start of 2020 is roughly 22%. In the UK, food prices alone are up over 30% since 2021. In Canada, groceries jumped 21.4% in just 3 years. Think of it this way. Imagine you're on a treadmill and someone keeps turning up the speed. In 2022, they cranked it to a sprint. Now they've dialed it back to a jog. The headlines say, "Great news, the treadmill is slowing down, but you're still running. You never stopped running, and you're exhausted." That's what cooling inflation actually means. And it's why, despite every official number saying the economy is doing better, most people feel like they're drowning. There's actually a word for this. Economist Kyla Scanlon coined the term "5-session." The economy looks fine on paper, but it feels terrible in real life. The University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index, which measures how people actually feel about their finances, has been sitting at levels typically seen only during major recessions, even though unemployment is near 50-year lows and GDP is growing. People don't eat the GDP, they spend what's in their pocket. And what's in their pocket is buying less. But here's where it gets really interesting, because the gap between what you feel and what the government reports, that's not an accident, it's by design. To understand why official inflation numbers feel like a lie, you need to understand how they're made. Every month, the government tracks a basket of thousands of goods and services. Everything from milk to medical bills to movie tickets. They check the prices, weigh them by how much the average consumer spends on each category, and produce a single number. That's the Consumer Price Index. The CPI. Sounds reasonable, right? And on the surface, it is. But buried inside the methodology are 3 tricks that consistently make inflation look lower than it actually is. Trick number 1. Substitution. The CPI assumes that if steak gets too expensive, you'll just switch to chicken. And then it starts tracking the price of chicken instead, which might be rising slower. So on paper, your food costs went down. But in reality, you just can't afford what you used to eat. It's like if your landlord doubled your rent and the government said, well, you moved to a smaller apartment so your housing costs are actually stable. Technically accurate, practically absurd. Trick number 2, and this is the big one, owner's equivalent rent. For homeowners, the CPI doesn't track actual home prices. It doesn't track your mortgage payment. Instead, it asks homeowners a hypothetical question. What do you think you could rent your home for? And that imaginary number is what goes into the index. Think about that for a second. The single biggest expense in most people's lives, shelter, is measured using a made-up number. Meanwhile, in the real world, US median home prices exploded 47% between 2020 and 2024, from $329,000 to $485,000. Rents are up 25% nationally. The home price-to-income ratio has hit 7.5 times the median household income, far above the historical norm of about 4 times. Housing is the least affordable it's been in decades. But according to the CPY, it's fine. And trick number 3, hedonic adjustment. This is where things get almost comedic. Let's say a new car costs $1,000 more than last year's model, but it has a slightly better backup camera. The Bureau of Labor Statistics might say, well, the quality improved, so the quality adjusted price actually went down. You paid more, the sticker price is higher, but officially, the car got cheaper. Now imagine these 3 tricks compounding year after year across thousands of products. The result is an official inflation number that consistently understates what you're actually experiencing. As one economist put it, the CPY is a map, but it's not the territory. People will live in the territory. And your personal inflation rate? It depends entirely on who you are. If you rent, recently bought a home, or have a family, categories where inflation has been the most extreme, your actual inflation rate is way higher than 3.3%. It might be 10%. It might be 15%. The national average was never your number to begin with. But there's another layer to this, because rising prices are only half the story. The other half, the products you're buying, are getting worse. You've probably heard of shrinkflation. The product gets smaller, the price stays the same. But the scale of what's happening right now is unprecedented. Gatorade quietly redesigned its iconic 32-ounce bottle down to 28 ounces, a 12.5% reduction. Same price, same shelf, same shape, just slightly narrower, hoping you wouldn't notice you're getting an eighth less. Cadbury Dairy milk bars in the UK went from 200 grams to 180. Doritos party-size bags lost a full ounce. Scott's toilet paper, the brand that literally marketed itself as 1,000 sheets per roll, quietly cut it to 960 sheets, then 921, then even lower. And then there's something even sneakier, skimpflation. This is when the product stays the same size, but the service gets worse. Hotels eliminating daily housekeeping unless you specifically request it. Airlines cutting legroom and charging for bags that used to be free. Companies replacing their customer service teams with chatbots that send you in circles for 45 minutes before disconnecting you. You're paying more for less product and worse service. And none of it shows up in the inflation number. By the way, if you're enjoying this deep dive, a like on this video genuinely helps us reach more curious minds like yours. It takes a second, and it makes a real difference. Now, here's the part nobody talks about, because everything I've described so far, the rising prices, the shrinking products, the worsening services, there's a common assumption behind all of it. We assume companies are raising prices because they have to, because their costs went up, because of supply chains, because of the pandemic. And that was true for a while. But then something else happened. In 2021 and 2022, corporate profits as a share of GDP hit their highest level in over 70 years. Let that land. Not 70 months, 70 years. We're talking the highest since the early 1950s. And here's the catch. Supply chain disruptions were real in 2020 and early 2021. Shipping costs exploded. Raw materials were scarce. Companies had legitimate reasons to raise prices. But then something shifted. Shipping costs came back down. Supply chains normalized. Input costs fell. And the prices, they stayed up. Companies discovered something powerful. Consumers had gotten used to the new prices. They'd accepted them. They'd adjusted their mental anchors. And so instead of lowering prices to match their lower costs, corporations simply kept the money. They expanded their profit margins. And they said the quiet part loud. On earnings calls, the quarterly calls where executives talked to investors, CEOs openly bragged about what they called pricing power. They talked about how consumers had accepted higher price points, how they intended to protect their expanded margins, This wasn't hidden in some leak. It was said proudly, on the record, to shareholders. Former US Secretary of Labor, Robert Reich, put it bluntly. It's not just that costs went up. Companies took the opportunity of this inflationary moment to expand their profit margins. There's a difference between passing on costs and padding the bill. A Federal Reserve study found that corporate profits contributed more to inflation in 2021 than in the previous 40 years combined. Think about that for a second. 40 years combined. So when someone tells you inflation is just the cost of the pandemic or the price of supply chain disruption, that's part of the story. But it's not the whole story. A significant chunk of what you've been paying isn't a cost increase. It's a wealth transfer from your wallet to a corporate balance sheet. And this feeds into the most important and most uncomfortable part of this whole story. Because inflation doesn't hit everyone equally, not even close. Since January 2020, the S&P 500 has gone up over 65%. Real estate values have soared. If you own stocks and property going into the pandemic, you are dramatically richer today. This is called asset inflation. But here's who owns those assets. The top 10% of Americans own 89% of all stocks and mutual funds. The top 1%, they own over half. So what actually happened over the last 4 years is a K-shaped economy. The top of the K, people with assets, rode inflation upward. Their homes are worth more, their portfolios are up, their wealth exploded. The bottom of the K, people who live paycheck to paycheck, who rent, who spend most of their income on groceries and gas, they got crushed by the exact same force. Same economy, same inflation, wildly different outcomes. And the cruel irony, when the Federal Reserve raised interest rates to fight inflation, it made mortgages and car loans more expensive, punishing the very people who were already hurting the most, while barely affecting the wealthy who don't need to borrow. So where does this leave you? Right now, in 2024, this is the reality. Average wages in the US have risen about 20% since early 2020, but the CP1 has risen 22%, which means, in real terms, the average worker's paycheck buys less today than it did before the pandemic. Your number is bigger, your purchasing power is smaller, and it's worse for the things that matter most. Food is up over 25%, transportation over 30%. If you're a renter in a city like Austin, Texas, you might have gone from paying $1,200 a month in 2020 to $1,600 now. That's an extra $4,800 a year just for having the same roof over your head. That single increase can wipe out every raise you've gotten. And let's talk about what comes next. Because here's what most people don't realize. Prices are not coming back down. Widespread price drops, deflation, are extremely rare. They're typically associated with severe economic depressions, and central banks actively work to prevent them. The goal was never to bring prices back to 2019 levels. The goal is disinflation, just making them rise slower. The prices of 2024, they're the new floor. You're standing on it right now. Looking ahead to 2026 and 2027, economists project what some are calling a high-plateau economy. Prices for services like insurance, healthcare, rent, car repairs will likely keep rising stubbornly, even as goods inflation stabilizes. High-income households will keep spending, but lower and middle-income households will be forced into harder and harder choices. More credit card debt, less savings, more substitution, which, remember, conveniently makes the official inflation number look better. And here's a counterintuitive fact worth sitting with. Sometimes, when the headline inflation number finally drops to 2% or lower, it's not because things got more affordable. It can mean people simply ran out of money and stopped buying things. Demand collapsed. The economy is weakening under the weight of prices that are already too high. A good number, hiding a bad reality. But, and this matters, you're not powerless. Become a unit price expert. Ignore family-size marketing labels. Look at the price per ounce, per gram, per sheet. That's where you catch shrinkflation in the act. Audit every subscription and recurring charge. The shift from one-time purchases to monthly subscriptions, software, streaming, even car features like heated seats, creates a slow, permanent drain on your income that didn't exist a decade ago. Cut aggressively. Challenge junk fees, the service fee, the resort fee, the convenience charge. These are drip pricing strategies designed to show you a low number upfront and bleed you on the back end. Push back. Ask for them to be removed. Sometimes they will be. And most importantly, focus on income. In an environment where prices aren't coming down, the single most effective thing you can do is make your income go up faster than inflation. Negotiate raises, change jobs. People who switch roles typically see a 10 to 15% salary bump versus the 3 to 4% annual raise of staying put. Build a skill that the market pays a premium for. The best defense against a silent tax is a louder paycheck. Here's the thing that sticks with me. We've been told for 4 years that the economy is recovering, and by certain measures it has. GDP is up, unemployment is down, the stock market hit all-time highs. But for most people, recovery doesn't feel like recovery. It feels like running faster just to stay in the same place, because the scoreboard changed, but nobody told you. The rules shifted, and the biggest transfer of purchasing power in a generation happened so quietly that most people still don't fully understand it happened at all. That's the silent tax. No ballot, no vote, no receipt, just less in your pocket every single day. If this video changed how you see inflation, subscribe to Cortivox. We explain the stories that shape your world every single week. And if there's a topic you want us to break down next, drop it in the comments. Now watch this video about how the housing market became impossible. It'll completely change your perspective on where all of this is headed.